In notes number 2, we're going to talk about how to write equations of midsegments and medians specifically. So first we need to remember what a midsegment is, and a midsegment connects two midpoints together. To write an equation of a line, remember we need to have the slope of that line. So if you look at my bullet point right here, we need both of the midpoint coordinates. Then we would need to find the slope between those two midpoints. We need to use one of those midpoint coordinates to put into our point slope form, and then we can use the slope with that to write our equation. So first, we're going to write the equation of the midsegment connecting segment AB to segment BC. So we need to find the midpoints between them first. So step 1 is to find the midpoint of segment AB and segment BC. Remember, your midpoint formula is right up here, so we have x plus x divided by 2 and y plus y divided by 2. We are going to first find the midpoint of AB, so I wrote my two coordinates, and now we need to add our x's together and add the y's together. So our x's are -2 and a 0, the y's are -5 and a 3. So -2 plus 0 is -2 over 0, or -2, sorry, and then it's still over the 2. -5 plus 3 is a -2, and then it's still over the 2. So when we reduce that, it becomes -1 and -1. And as you can see, I graphed it, and it's right on that line. So if it wasn't on the line, that would tell me it was incorrect. Next, we need to find the midpoint of segment BC, so I'm choosing a different color for this one. We need to add our x's again, so we have 0 plus the 6, and add our y's together, so 3 plus our -3. 0 plus 6 is 6, that's still over the 2. 3 plus -3 is 0, so now we have 0 over 2. When we reduce those, we get a 3 and then a 0. So there's our second midpoint. So once we graph it, we can connect them together. So that blue line now is my midsegment. So number 2, step 2, we need to find the slope between those two midpoints. So our slope, we need to use our equation of y minus y minus all over x minus x, and our two coordinates are the -1, -1, and 3, 0. So y's go on top. I always go left to right, so -1 minus my 0, so then I have to go -1 minus my 3. That gives us a -1 on top and a -4, which reduces down to a positive 1/4 is our slope. Another way we could use that is we can count up and over, and we can see it's up 1 and over 4, and that is a positive slope as well. So you can count if you choose to. Moving on to step 3, we need to use the slope from previously. So we're going to use the slope of our 1/4, and we need to use one of our midpoints. So either we can use the purple one or the pink one, so -1, 1, or the 3, 0. So let's use the -1, 1. Now when we put them into our point slope form, we have a -1, so that is going to make this really a +1, and our x is also a -1, so that's really going to make it a +1. Then our slope goes in front of the x, and there would be our equation in point slope form. Now we need to take that equation and we need to write it into slope intercept form. To do that, we need to distribute the 1/4, so we're going to get 1/4 x plus 1/4 times 1 is 1/4 again, and then we still have our y plus 1 on the other side. We then need to subtract the 1, so get y equals 1/4 x. And then when we have a positive 1/4 and -1, we end up with -3/4 as our y-intercept. And if you look at our graph, our y-intercept is just a little bit more than halfway, but not quite to -1, so that makes sense that this is -3/4. Now we are moving on to medians, and we're going to save those other questions for just more practice in class. So to write the equation for a median, we need to remember what a median is, and a median is, I want you to fill it in now off to the side. You should have selected it connects the vertex to the midpoint. So since we use the vertex to the midpoint, we need the vertex coordinate. We would also need the midpoint coordinate on the opposite side of our triangle. So we'd have to find the midpoint coordinate with our midpoint formula. Then we need to connect those two together, and we're going to have to find the slope of that line. So the slope between the vertex and the midpoint. We would use one of those endpoints then, the vertex or the midpoint, along with our slope to write our equation. And we're going to start into point slope form again and then transfer it into slope intercept form. So first off, we need to know which sides we're going to be talking about. And so here in our triangle, we need to write the equation of the median connecting segment AB to the vertex C. So here's our vertex. So we need to find the midpoint then of side AB, and that's our first step. So find the midpoint of that opposite side. Since we've already done one midpoint equation together, I want you now to find the midpoint between A and B. You should have set up, you're adding your x's together like so, and our y's like that. Then when we add them, you would get a negative 8 over 2 and a 0 over 2. When you simplify that again, then your final midpoint would be a negative 4 and 0. And if you double check, we can graph that, and it is right there halfway between. Next, we need to find the slope between that midpoint, so our negative 4, 0, and the vertex is going to connect to 2, and that's our point C over here. So 6, negative 4. Remember again, we want to subtract our y's on top first. That would be 0 minus the negative 4, and then the x's on the bottom, so negative 4 minus the 6. Remember, we have a double negative, so that makes it a plus. The top then gives us a 4, and then the denominator, negative 4 minus 6, is a negative 10. We can reduce those by dividing by 2. That would give us a 2, and a negative 5 would be our slope. And if we check, if we go down 2 and over 5, down 2 over 5, it does end up at point C. Now remember, we need to use those two things to find our equation. We have the slope, and that's the negative 2/5. We have a coordinate. We can either use the coordinate negative 4, 0, so our midpoint, or we could use our point C, and that's completely up to you of which one you want to use. And on this one, let's go ahead and use our negative 4, 0 that we just found. When we put it into our equation, that's what I want you now to do, is to fill in your point slope form. Since we're using our coordinate negative 4, 0, our y value is 0, our x is negative 4, which makes this a plus 4. The slope in front of your x then should be a negative 2/5. This one is pretty quick on putting into slope-intercept form, because when we distribute, we get a negative 2/5 x, and when we distribute this by 4, remember how we multiply fractions, we multiply, first you need to make the 4 a fraction, so put it over 1, but then we go straight across on top and bottom. So we get a negative 8 on top and a 5 on the bottom. So we have negative 2/5 x minus 8 over 5. But what makes it so much nicer is this minus the 0 just kind of disappears, and we just have to distribute, and that is it. And just like on the front side of your notes, we're not going to finish this last question. We're going to save that for in class.